So think about it. You're at home, watching a movie, when suddenly, bam, fire happens. What do? A lot of people, they don't know. Well, that's what I'm here for. I'm here to teach you a little bit about fire safety to make sure that your home or apartment or condo or whatever it may be, make sure that it's safe. Fire safety at home. What can you do to make sure that you're safe and everybody else around you is too? A few things come to mind, I'm sure. Smoke detectors, carbon monoxide. What about a fire safety plan? Ever think of that? The truth is, most people think about smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors, baseboard heaters. A lot of people forget, if a fire does happen, what do you do then? In a lot of ways, a fire safety plan is fire prevention, even though the fire has already started. So, what is a fire safety plan? Well, it's right in the name. A fire safety plan is a plan for your safety when a fire happens. It's really easy too. All you need to do is just go home, walk around, sit down, look it over, figure out, if a fire happens, where can I get out? What's the safest way to get out? What happens if what I originally planned to, all of a sudden because of fire, I can't go there? After that, it's really important that everybody in your household knows, where can I get out from your specific bedroom? Where can I go out if I'm in the kitchen, the dining room? A comprehensive knowledge of the plan is by far the easiest way to make sure that everybody gets out alive and safe. That doesn't mean it has to take a long time. Depending on the size of your house and how many rooms are in it, a safety plan could take no more than 10 minutes. You need to make sure that you're aware of your house to make sure that you know everything about it. That's really all a fire safety plan is. And yet that basic knowledge could save your life, and as well everybody else who lives with you. So take the time, make a fire safety plan. It could be all you have when the fire starts. Or is it? The wonderful thing is that we don't have to rely on ourselves to let us know when a fire happens. That's why we have smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, all those wonderful things that really now are the law. The first patent for a smoke alarm was in 1890 by Francis Robbins Upton. George Andrew Darby patented the first heat detector in 1902. The first industrial smoke alarms hit the market in 1951. And the small circular version that we now know today, that was introduced in 1970. With all that, 93% of North American homes now have them, and 85% of European homes now have them. Yet a recent study shows that 30% of those that are installed are not functioning properly. And an NFPA study showed that in 2/3 of home fires that had casualties, the smoke alarms were not working. That means that almost 40 million people in Canada and the US are currently living without the basic safety of a smoke detector. But why? The technology's been around for over 110 years now, and they've been in our homes for almost 50 years now. The most common excuse? It won't happen to me. But also it could be that some people, they just don't know how it works. So I'd like to take a minute and explain to you, how does your basic smoke alarm work? For that, I'm going to give it over to a man with a fantastic mustache to explain everything for you.
They've become common in our houses and places of residence. The common, everyday smoke alarm. Hi, I'm Captain Joe Bruni. Have you ever wondered how a smoke alarm works? The smoke alarm, basically, is simple in design. The circuit board, where the electronics are against the base plate in the back of the system. Mounted to the circuit board is the horn that emits the audible tone when the smoke alarm is set off, the sensing chamber where smoke enters to be picked up that there may be a possible fire, and the area that houses the battery. How they work basically are two different types, ionization and photoelectric. The ionization type uses a small radioactive source that emits current between two contacts. When smoke particles break that electrical current flow, it sets off the alarm. The photoelectric uses a light beam source inside the sensing chamber. When smoke particles break the photoelectric light beam, it sets off the alarm. Smoke alarms are pretty basic and simple in design. They are meant to alert occupants of any structure in the early beginning stages of a fire, so that they can evacuate and exit the structure safely long before smoke becomes a problem for the occupants of the dwelling.
So there you have it. No more excuses. You know what to do with them. You know how they work. Where should you put them though? A smoke alarm should be present on every level of your dwelling, as well as in front of every sleeping accommodations. They should be installed on the ceiling at least 2 feet from where the ceiling and the walls meet. Installing it any closer than the 2 feet causes the problem that you may fall into a dead zone where smoke does not want to accumulate. At that point, the smoke alarm might take longer to sound, which means you have less time to get out when a fire happens. Placing them outside of cooking areas is not recommended, mostly because none of us know how to cook. We burn our food, we take it down, we never put it back up again, so it's like it was never there in the first place, really, so hey, what can you do? Well, you could learn how to cook. And if you do know how to cook and you don't usually create a lot of smoke, then by all means, go ahead, put one in the kitchen. It's a really good place to put it, just if you know how to cook. Anyways, so now you've got them, you've installed them, and they're running fine, but for how long? I don't know, do you? That's why it's important to check them once a month and change the batteries every 6 months. Usually, it's a really good idea to change the batteries every time that you change the hour on your clock. There you get rid of 2 marginally inconvenient tasks at the same time. Smoke alarms. They're really not that complicated. And if you want to make things really easy, just get yourself a smoke alarm that's got a carbon monoxide detector built right into it. Then everything's covered in one simple item. The laws for carbon monoxide detectors are basically the same as any smoke alarm. One on every level, in front of every sleeping accommodations. A kitchen, not necessarily the most useful item is a carbon monoxide there, because if you're cooking with natural gas, it won't detect it. It really only does carbon monoxide. But if you want to go put one there, by all means. It's better to have too many than not at all. But since carbon monoxide detectors are a relatively new technology, a lot of people aren't familiar with them yet, at least not as much as a smoke alarm, unless you've had a call of it yourself already. So ask yourself this: what does a carbon monoxide detector sound like when it rings? A study conducted in 2013 showed that 98% of Americans knew the sound of a smoke alarm without necessarily having to see one. 30% of Americans didn't know the sound of a carbon monoxide detector if one wasn't in front of them. So what does it sound like? Well, obviously it depends a little bit on where you're at and where the regulations are from, but let me show you a common one. But carbon monoxide detectors may not be the only fire prevention items that are in your house that you're not necessarily comfortable with. Think of a fire extinguisher. There's a large number of us that have never used a fire extinguisher, but this next lesson comes with a disclaimer. If there's a fire in your house, get out. Don't try to fight it, get out. Let the professionals take care of it. It's still good to know the basics of a fire extinguisher, however. So, we're going to give you a little bit of information on what kind of extinguishers are best used in a house. For that, I'm going to give it over to a guy that's in a kitchen that probably came straight out of a 70s show.
It's a good idea to always keep a fire extinguisher in the kitchen, whether it be next to the stove or under the sink, so that it's out of the way. When you go to purchase a fire extinguisher, they have fire extinguishers for kitchens or garages, but a good all-around fire extinguisher would be an ABC fire extinguisher. It covers both wood and paper, liquid fires, and electrical fires. The most common fire that you'll have in a kitchen is a grease fire on the stove, and this will handle the liquid fires or electrical fire from your toaster or your microwave. It is a good idea to once a year check the level and the pressure in your fire extinguisher. Just look at the gauge to make sure it is in the full mark. If it is not, you can either get it reserviced or buy a new one. It's easier to go ahead and purchase a new one. It'll cost about the same. Fire extinguishers are really inexpensive and well worth it for the house.
See what I mean? That kitchen though. Wow. Moving on from that and continuing on with our lesson on fire safety in the home, so far we've been talking about things that happen when the fire has already started. But how are ways that you can stop the fire from happening in the first place? That kind of falls into the fire safety plan that we had talked about earlier. You need to be aware of your home and all the potential dangers that it holds. One glaringly obvious example of a danger: the fireplace. Not a lot of people have them, but those who do really need to be sure that they know how to properly maintain one. Fireplace fires are most likely to happen during the spring and the fall, when people are either starting up to use them for the winter time, or they're slowly stopping to use them once the warmer weather comes. That's why it's important to make sure that it is properly cleaned before it goes into service for the winter time, especially if it's a natural wood-burning fire like this one behind me. But not everything is so glaringly obvious as a fireplace. Anything that gives off heat, anything that's electrical, anything that could contain heat is a potential risk for fire. That's why it's important to keep candles and matches away from each other when you're in storage. It's also why you should unplug any electrical appliances while they're not in use. And that's why you should always be alert when you're cooking. Cooking fires are one of the most common types of fires in households. And almost all of them are preventable, if not all of them. And never smoke in bed. But with all that being said, sometimes fires just happen. You can't prevent them all. To demonstrate, however, the importance of getting out as soon as you can, I'm going to bring it over to the most scientifically accurate show in the world. Kind of.
This is either a hot water heater or it's a bomb. If it's a hot water heater, there's no problem. It just heats the water in your house. If it's a bomb, it fails catastrophically, sending the bottom shooting out, sending the top shooting up. This floor isn't going to offer much resistance to that water heater. The question we want to know is, what's it going to do when it hits this roof? Is it going to make a nice, clean, round hole I can stare all the way into the basement through? Or is it going to be interrupted on its journey into the sky and never make it out of the house? That's what we want to find out. Okay, I'm going to do some live math here. The hot water heater itself is 18 inches in diameter. Now, for the area of that, it's pi r squared, which equals 254 square inches of the bottom. Now, you've got a pounds per square inch pressure inside of 336. Multiply that by 254, you get 85,500 pounds of pressure. Let me say that again, 85,500 pounds of pressure pushing against the bottom of the heater. You would fail too.
335.
You know what I see? I see a hole in the roof, man.
Holy cow. Now that's what I call mission accomplished.
I wish you could be here for this kind of explosion, because when the hot water heater finally blows, we're staring right at it because we know where the zone is, and the thud that comes out of it is so deeply guttural and still whoa kind of thud. It's great. Watch it again. Give me some skin there.
Looking at the damage the water heater did to the building, it left some neat holes in the first floor and through the roof, which is no big deal, but looking more carefully, you realize what a shock the entire building took.
Wow. Yeah, look at how much damage it did to the plywood right here.
The cinder blocks that I put underneath the ground floor are actually shattered from the downward push. It actually lifted the entire roof off of its seat and then set it down. You know, this would pretty much ruin your house.
Now that was an extreme example. Water heaters have natural fail-safes put into them to make sure that the pressure doesn't get that high, but other items like propane tanks might not necessarily have them working, or even they're too old for them to be properly working. And all the damage they were talking about to the house, naturally over time in a fire, that'll happen anyways. Not from a water heater, but from simple exposure to fire. And as the fire behind me dies out, so ends this segment on fire safety in the home. Remember, smoke alarms save lives, and always let the professionals take care of it. Don't stay in the house, get out. From the St. Lawrence College Pre-Service Firefighter Program, thank you. Have a good evening.